For more interviews on educational technology and for a list of our technology workshops, please visit www.edtechlive.com. To join the discussion on School 2.0, please visit www.school20.net.
Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to EdTech Live. Today is Thursday, December 21st, and I have Sheryl Nussbaum-Beach with me today, and we're going to talk hopefully a little bit about technology in the classroom and maybe touch on some other interesting topics. Sheryl, first start, could you talk a little bit about your background and what it is that you currently do?
Well, my background's sort of varied. I've been in education for about 23 years, and I've done a little bit of everything that you can do. I've been a classroom teacher. I've worked as a principal of a small private school. I've been a district office administrator, worked in media and communications and in technology. And then I've taught on the university level, both undergraduate and graduate, for pre-service teachers. And currently I work as an adjunct instructor at the College of William & Mary, and then I'm also an educational consultant. There's several projects that I'm involved in. Probably the biggest one would be a grant that I helped to write with Microsoft for their Partners in Learning project, and we're doing that in Alabama, where we're doing a 21st century teaching and learning project, which we did 20 schools in the first year and 40 schools in the second year. And so that's kind of what I'm doing now. I've been involved in technology pretty much the whole time that I've been involved in education in one way or another. Most specifically, when I was at W.T. Cook Elementary School, I was a computer resource teacher there. I used to live in Georgia, and in Georgia, technology was my passion, but when I came to Virginia, technology became my career.
Sheryl, I had an interesting visit the other day with the director of Technology Education Services for a region in California. And it was interesting to me because he said that he really didn't feel as though technology had made any more inroads in the last couple of years than it had in the last 15 years. From your perspective, does that seem accurate?
No, I don't agree with that at all, actually. Like a lot of us, I got involved in technology on the pre-service level probably about '88. I can remember when we first started, being able to collaborate together online back in the bulletin board days and that kind of thing. And I took teachers. I did a thing where there was a bunch of pre-service teachers in Georgia, and we connected via email and different bulletin boards with teachers that were in different countries. And this was, pretty progressive at the time. And they shared information. We put together a literacy fair. And, while that was bulletin board stuff, we didn't really, I don't think that was accepted. It was seen as very rare. It was very novel and pretty exciting, where then you followed it all the way through to today, and I see it pretty pervasive. I mean, in the schools that I visit and the teachers that I talk to outside of the blogosphere, there's a lot of teachers that are very aware of it. They know that the kids need it. They know that their skills need to grow in order to be able to, talk to the kids and teach them in the language they understand. I think Web 2.0 has just made a tremendous impact, way different than 15 years ago. I was listening to a clip with Seymour Papert speaking the other day, and one of the things he said just really struck me, where he was talking about how, back about 15 years ago, we were really looking at constructivist type issues, and there was a lot of emphasis on Piaget and some of the things that he was teaching, and how we really need to make things student-centered and have the kids start using. And that's, of course, when Seymour started really doing his things with logo and all. And he said the reason it didn't take off is because we didn't have the knowledge information tools then that we do now. And so I see it as 15 years ago really laying the foundation, and that it's been building since, and that right now we're really getting into a place where things are just going to take off, because I think the foundation's finally been laid. People do accept it. They see the need, and it's just going to go boom from here.
Well, I think one of his points was that 15 years ago he was able to bring a computer into the classroom and play around with it and engage his students. But now he can't do anything without permission from the school or the district or even sometimes the county, and that teachers are much more constrained in their ability to access a lot of these resources that you and I are finding so exciting. Is that just one piece of the puzzle? Do you think that's as pervasive as he may feel?
I think that is a very important piece of the puzzle, and I definitely think it's an obstacle or a challenge, but what I see it as is a real opportunity for teachers to experiment and grow as in their area of leadership. I think that it's actually a moral responsibility of teacher leaders in the school to do their homework, to figure out how to access the things on the web and be able to let the students use these exceptional tools to learn in ways that really make sense to them, at the same time keeping them safe and protecting them from anything that might be questionable out there. I think it's a teacher leader's responsibility to not only do her homework and her research and be able to go in and present that to the administration team, but I think it's very important to get the IT staff involved. One of the things that I've seen in Alabama is that a lot of times, people will think about the teachers and they'll think about the principals and they'll think about, even higher up dealing with district office, but the IT people who are the ones that hold the keys are kind of left out of the conversation. And so I think that part of what we're going to see as we move forward in this is that teachers really need to develop an ongoing relationship with the IT people where both of them are sort of educating each other and allowing the students to have a voice in that as well.
When I talk about Web 2.0 technologies, I often use the word transformative. For me, blogging has been a transformative experience. Participating in the right portion of the read-write web has literally changed my perception of how I learn, listening to podcasts, participating in online sessions. These things have really transformed me. Is it your feeling that the technologies now really are so compelling that we just have to find a way to bring them into the classroom?
Absolutely. I think that for no other reason, we do have a group of kids that are coming up and a group of learners that it's going to be absolutely mandatory for them to be able to have these skills. I like to share with people when I'm speaking to different audiences about that you and I, we really had a choice, Steve. We could decide whether we wanted to master these technologies or not, or if we were going to say, well, no, it's a little too complicated because we're locked out of everything. And, and yet we're still successful. I mean, people our age and people that were involved, went to school when we did, they're still successful. But the students that are under our watch now, they aren't being afforded that choice. And that if they don't master these skills within the safety net of our classrooms, and they don't learn to use them responsibly and understand how to collaborate in teams, how to be self-driven in their learning experiences, using these kinds of knowledge management tools, that if they aren't transformed by them and become well-versed and literate in them, then they're not going to be successful in the 21st century in the workplace. And that wasn't an issue for us. It is an issue for them. I do agree with you that they are totally transformative. I'll share a story with you. I teach pre-service teachers now over at the College of William and Mary, and I teasingly call it that I get to birth bloggers all the time. And it's very exciting for me because I take teachers, beginning teachers, novice teachers who really haven't ever blogged before, and they don't really see the need, and they aren't connected with it at all. And then by the end of the semester, they're just, when you read their blogs, they are transformed. It is very transformative, and you can see that not only do they want to get their students using it, but all the things that we say about K through 12 with the comments and such, that these pre-service teachers relate to the same thing and get so excited, and they become much more reflective. They become they give more thought to what it is they're doing as far as their pedagogy, and I see that across all different fields, not just in education.
Well, I had kind of an aha moment in this discussion that I had 2 days ago. He was talking, we were talking about the ability to actually implement these technologies in the classroom, and he was expressing his feeling that was going to be very difficult to actually implement. And so I asked him if he was blogging, and I think he felt a little sheepish, but he said no. And I asked if he was listening to podcasts, and he said, well, I just don't really have the time. And the aha moment for me was that it's probably going to be very hard for teachers to implement these technologies if the school and district level decision makers aren't experiencing the same benefits of the technology themselves.
That's absolutely right. I totally agree with that. I think that it's kind of like you can't give away what you don't own, and that until they experience themselves and they have that transformative moment where they're actually using them and understand the magic that takes place in the type of learning and the kinds of connections that you're making and the synergy that's involved in that, and how it really changes your perception about whatever it is that you're studying or whatever it is you're pursuing, they're not going to get it. And I think that I think research has even shown, if I've ran across several studies that show that in school systems where you have administrators or principals or people in leadership, even teacher leaders, who are embracing these technologies, the staff will follow suit. And that if the leadership doesn't give it any importance and doesn't understand the value, then pretty much the teachers are going to see that there isn't any need to go there themselves. And so it's real important. I think that involving people on the district level and school principals, it's very important that we let them see the power. One of the things I tell principals all the time when I talk to them is that if there was one language that they need to learn, it's going to be HTML, and that they're going to need to get out there on the web and be able to know how to use these communication tools, because their stakeholders, their parents, are used to this instant information at the click of a button, and it's part of everyone's life outside of the school, and that if they want to truly be collaborative and be able to get the kind of buy-in that they're going to need from the school community at large, then they're going to need to be able to use these tools to communicate.
So you said you called it the magic, and I called it transformative. What is it about these technologies that you think is so significant?
I think it parallels to the first time that someone has a piece of work published, or the first time that someone gets back a paper that a teacher has taken the time to reflect and put lots of comments in the paper about the person's ideas. I think the magic, the transformative nature of it is that it is collaborative, that it's like being published, that there's this connection inside yourself where you come to the point that you say, whoa, what I'm writing here, somebody else is interested in reading, and I'm building, it's scholarship because I'm building upon the ideas of other people, and there's a self-efficacy that develops. And I think once, in every one of us, no matter how much positive our self-concept is, that once we start to see that our ideas, that other people are connecting with our ideas, they're building on our ideas, and that we're growing from theirs, and that it's a real sharing process, that there's a growth where you really move towards being self-actualized. And I think that's what the magic is that when you look at a hierarchy of needs and you look at how you're moving up that scale, that technology, when you're using the read-write web the way that it's set up now with the tools that are available, allows us to move a little bit quicker in our own personal development. And I think that's what's transformative. I think that's what's magical. And I think that's what's truly going to put our students and our learners in a position to be able to engage in ways they never have before. I mean, I had an experience with Mark Wagner a couple days ago, and he just happened to be on Skype, and I was writing an abstract and needed an extra pair of eyes, and we started collaborating together live right there, things that I've done with other people, but typically through handing them something, they'd rewrite it, give it back, I'd rewrite it, that kind of back and forth. But it was like it was live, and we were going back and forth and doing it, and then we were both able to walk away from there with pieces of that we applied to work that we were doing in totally separate realms. And I thought, if we could just figure out how to take these types of technologies, this peer-to-peer stuff, and be able to get everyone on board using it, then we would have access to the expertise around the world in all different cultures, and that the world would be a very small place. It wouldn't be, to be global would be just very common.
That's got to be pretty scary for somebody who's been teaching in a traditional environment for years and years. Because even for me, loving these tools and using them every day, it feels brand new, and it feels like, boy, you'd have to really figure that out. I mean, bringing that into the classroom, that would take a lot of work.
Yeah, one of the things that I did when I first went to W.T. Cook Elementary School, I had actually been teaching for an organization that was training network administrators. I had left education and gone into the IT world for a little while and really missed it. I felt guilty every single day of my life, like what kind of difference am I making in the world, and decided to go back. My mother became very ill, and so I took a job in an elementary school. They were implementing a new program called the Computer Resource Specialist. And when I did that, the teachers, when I got there, there was a lot of old Apple IIe's sitting around the classroom, a lot of them broken. There were a few new computers, but really they weren't passionate about technology at all. And I'd say on a developmental continuum of 1 to 10, most of them were at a 2. And so they were that teacher you're talking about, where they had done wonderful things with kids. They had taught many children to read and had done exceptional things. This particular school had a very high transient population. They have most of the homeless children in the Virginia Beach area go to this particular school, and they had done tremendous things with families and kids, and no one could take that away from them. So I knew that I was going to have to get buy-in, because I saw these tools as a way that we could really level the playing field for the students that they were serving. That if they did not get these skills, then it was going to continue to be this chasm between the haves and the have-nots as they left elementary and went into middle and went into high school and went out into the workplace. And I wanted to help the teachers understand technology was a way to change that. So basically what I did is I just rolled up my sleeves and got my hands dirty with them. I said, I'm going to work with you. We're going to do this together. We started it out where I modeled the technologies. They would come in when they bring their students to the lab. Instead of dropping them off like they often do for PE or art so they could have their planning time, they actually would come in. They would sit at a computer. I did it in a way that preserved their self-concept, so it wasn't like your teacher doesn't know anything about this. So, we did it in a way so that it was like everybody was learning together. Every day I learned something from the kids because they knew something about the technology I didn't. And they would watch and I would model. And then that went on for about a year. And after when we got to the place of the second year, we collaborated by co-teaching. They would bring the kids and we would plan together and we would co-teach. And by year 3, we had moved on that continuum from a 2 all the way to a 10. We were the second school out of 92 schools in our district to become 100% TSIP certified, which was Technology Standards for Instructional Personnel. It was a criteria that our school system required. And the teachers were teaching their own lessons, and so then I got to concentrate on how they could use the computers in their own classroom and got to move, how I was going to do it. But I see the same kind of thing in Alabama. Year 1, I'm working with these teachers. I roll up my sleeves and I say, we're going to go through this a little bit at a time. The carrot for teachers, the why, is because if you tie it to the kids and they can see the excitement and the students that have never been successful academically or that have zoned out and haven't connected with what they're doing, that those kids are the ones that become electric and light up and really respond best and start learning, and that self-concept carries over to other areas, and that really the passion that they have just starts to exude and the teacher gets excited. Once they experience that, once they see that, then you have them, because they really understand that they're not doing this because central office says to do it. They're not doing this because it's one more silly initiative. They're doing this for the kids, for the children's sake. And that's why teachers are there. Teachers are there because they want to make life better for kids. And if you can tie it to that, then they understand and they're not threatened by it, and they're willing to be adaptive experts.
So in a period of time in which we largely measure our success in schools by tests, by our test results, are you able to point to circumstances where there's an improvement in test scores or in ways that are currently being measured to assess success that comes as a result of exposure to these technologies?
That's the golden question, and everybody, if you can tie 21st century teaching concepts and the kinds of things we're talking about here, using these pervasive tools in the classroom to student achievement, then we're in. We're in. The problem with that is that there are so many other variables that could be considered that it's hard to pinpoint and go through the layers and say, aha, it was because she used these particular strategies. But one of the things that I I fight all the time in the circles in which I run is helping teachers understand that it's not one or the other. A lot of times teachers tell me, well, because of this high stakes testing environment we're in and because I am judged by how well my students do on these standardized measures, I don't have time to implement and I can't be creative. And one of the things that I try to help them see is that by using problem-based, project-based, inquiry-driven type approaches, which technology in Web 2.0 fits in perfect with, that by doing that and allowing the student to really be self-directed with teacher-facilitated type learning, that the end result is that the students, because they're becoming decision makers, they're really doing higher order thinking skills that they weren't doing before with the watered down standardized kinds of things you're doing, that they actually do equal to or better than on normed measures. At W.T. Cook, and I'll just go back there again, we did an approach called Dream School. And what we did is a bunch of us met during the summer, and we had to do summer school because Title I school for the kids, we had gotten extra money for the kids who weren't doing real well. And so we put together what we entitled fondly Dream School, where it was all built around interdisciplinary, project problem-based, and we built it around different ancient cultures. And the ancient culture thing was just to get the kids really interested and get them excited about what we were doing. And those kids, because there was a pre, post, and we could look at what we were doing there, sort of an action research project, those kids did better. I had students that had never scored even passing on the standardized test. They're called SOLs in Virginia, but and if you don't pass them, you are. But what those kids had done is they did excellent. They did advanced on the technology measures. And then the next year we saw that start to spill over academically into other areas because they started feeling valued and feeling like they knew something about, were pretty good at something that some of the other kids weren't. And children that weren't passing different standardized measures the next year were motivated to try and felt like they could, and they had belief in themselves, and I think that really carried over. Now, being able, Steve, to point that down and say, oh, well, that was because you used, that you guys were blogging, or you guys were doing ThinkQuest, or you guys were using these tools, and these kids were in charge of their own learning, there's no way to do that.
Well, of course, my experiences with the Read Write Web have been so positive and personally engaging and transformative that I'm just trying to anticipate questions that would come up from people who would say, we've been promised for the last 20 years that the computer would transform the classroom. But you walk into most classrooms and there's students' desks in rows facing the teacher, and on the back wall there may be 4 or 5 computers, and they're not really integrated into the classroom experience. So I'm anticipating that someone would say, why is this any different than what we've been promised for the last 20 years?
Well, I think there's going to be a change in that kind of mindset. I'll take that angle first, and then if I don't get what you were getting at with that question, please hedge me back. But I think that you're going to see a change in that because about a third of our teaching force is at the place where they're going to be retiring. And we have the pre-service teachers that I'm working with are incredibly open to it. And I think they really because they've grown up with technology around them, and it isn't something that's odd or novel. It's something that's just, like I can remember when we got the microwave and how intimidated I was by it. And, I think a lot of teachers feel that way about computers. They're just not as comfortable with it. It isn't part of their real world, and they really have never had it attached to student success, student achievement, student motivation. But the kids that are coming out of the teacher ed programs now have. They've not only had it in their own personal experiences, but they've seen it. They know how motivated they are by it, and they've actually touched it and experienced it. And so I think what we're going to see is a real change there. I also think with the changing demographic, we're really seeing that the type of child that we see in our classrooms is very different from the type of student that I saw 10 or 15 years ago. There's a lot of high poverty, a lot of English as second language coming into the classroom, and it's going to be the kind of thing where teachers are really going to be looking for strategies of where they can collaborate and have students using things that are on, with technology is going to provide the perfect answer for that. Row and column and rote type things just aren't going to work anymore. The kids who I mean, if you look at Daniel Pink's work, the kids where he talks about that right-brainers are going to rule, the thing that really excites me about that is that the very child that was a right-brain processor, highly creative, very intuitive, a storyteller, that kind of thing, they're the ones who are really going to that respond best to these kinds of transformative technologies, and they're going to be able to take it and really succeed. So I think it's almost like the perfect storm, because you've got teachers, there's going to be a switch over, you've got teachers who are going to be more accepting of it. We've got an awareness now, Time Magazine and other people in the world that are coming to a place where they're saying, yes, there is something to this is not a fad, it's not going away, these truly are skills we need for the workplace in the 21st century. And then you've got these changing demographic, these kids that teachers really are going to be reaching out to try to find some answers to reach these kids. And I think when those three things come together, we're really going to see the kinds of things that you and I have been involved in and other educational bloggers really take off in the classroom, and that it's going to be not only widely accepted, it's going to be tremendously successful.
Yeah, it is interesting because certainly you and I can both look at the results of the active use of these technologies, and it really does seem compelling that a child or a student would be able to actually participate in the growth of knowledge about a particular area, that they can actually work on projects that contribute to the some knowledge that we have about different topics. Somebody who's really interested in history or in bugs or in something else, actually gets to participate in a way that's recorded and publicized through the web.
I think that there's a real balance that needs to go there too. I can remember when we were first doing thematic education, and that was a real controversial thing of outcome-based and all that. And that I remember going into this one teacher's classroom and I was just blown away, and she had student work and artifacts up everywhere, and they were studying the jungles, and the whole room looked like a jungle with the creatures that they had created, and the children were working in cooperative groups and they were collaborating, and there wasn't a lot of technology being used, but same kinds of pervasive strategies that we've been talking about here. And the one thing I noticed is that they could tell me everything I ever wanted to know about the macaw parrot. I mean, they knew everything, and they were motivated and excited and just electric when they talked about it. But a lot of them couldn't read and write. So I think that there's a balance there that we're going to need to have. So this interest that you're talking about, that a student can really add to a body of knowledge, now that we're actually taking that and we're at a place where we're aware of standards, if we can marry the two and we can let these kids be totally, I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that we have to sacrifice rigor to appeal to their passions and help them to pursue what they're interested in and add to a body of knowledge that's there. That we can have both. We can make it incredibly challenging and motivating, and yet they can really be engaged in things that they're interested in, but learning how to read at the same time. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a ton of sense. I'll often tell people that I'm one of the few people I know who actually took Latin in high school, and I all through my life I've appreciated the rigorous education I received in very structured ways that doesn't diminish from my self-learning, but actually has helped me, I think, become a better self-learner.
Right. I think it does. I think that when you're looking at things like that, like Latin and different things that you're interested in that are tough, well, I had the same experience just recently with I took the statistics course in my PhD program, and I was nervous going into it. Main reason is because I hadn't done the type of traditional studying that statistics course required me to do. It was intermediate statistics, and I was a little bit worried about if I still had the go-to-ness to be able to crack a book, read the chapter, massively understand the concepts, and then apply them on regular assessments. And at the end of this course, I was pretty excited. I mean, I aced the final. I aced it, and I felt like, I really know this stuff now. And today I had the opportunity to take what I had known and apply it to the evaluation plan that we're creating in Alabama. And I think that's what we're really talking about here. I think a lot of people, when they think about students using constructivist methods, and they're taking these technologies and they're collaborating and they're communicating and it's student directed, they automatically assume that we're talking about fluff, and that if students, you leave them to their own interest and they're going to study what they want and they're not going to get to learn or have that kind of Latin experience that you're talking about. And I think that's very different than what it really is. What we're really talking about here is a deepening of learning, more of a challenge, the kind of thing where they can walk away feeling like they're well versed enough not only in the content that they were studying, but in how to learn. They know how to research, they know how to collaborate, they know how to team, they know how to apply what they're learning instead of just memorizing a lot of facts so that they can answer multiple choice questions on a test.
Well, I think sort of on the other side of the whole question of the changed classroom will be different from the results that we're looking for. It will be what students come into the classroom having experienced at home. If they've got a MySpace account or they're using photo sharing services, they're probably already pretty used to being fairly engaged in types of interaction that are highly communicative.
That is so right. I mean, my son, I guess, is the typical NetGenner, and you walk into his room, and it's more connected than, like NASA used to be back when I was a kid. He's got technology everywhere in there, and that's typical for a 16-year-old's bedroom today, for a lot of 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds. And he wanted to learn Russian, so he taught himself Russian, and he basically has access to anything he wants to learn at any time, and he's not the kind, I think that it's often misunderstood that kids today don't really want to learn, and that I hear people talk about that they have this where they expect everything to be handed to them, and that's not what I've seen from the kids that are using these technologies. I see exactly what you're talking about, that they're gaining an experience-based, their conceptual awareness, and if we really are moving from the information age into the age of conceptualization, I think that the kids that are using Web 2.0 social networking technologies, that they are building, even if they didn't have the experience base because maybe they were impoverished or they've, did for whatever reasons, that they are building a conceptual base that is going to put them at an advantage to be able to operate in the 21st century, because they'll be able to build upon that and be able to be, because it's really going to take being able to adapt. I watched Microsoft do a presentation, and they pulled out this rubric where they showed how they evaluated their different employees, and one of the benchmarks on the rubric was embrace ambiguity. And it was a check for me. I mean, I just had to ask myself, okay, what am I doing to make sure that my students are prepared to embrace ambiguity? And I think that the students that are using these types of technologies, they are going to be able to understand what it means to be an adaptive expert, and how to be innovative, and how to be creative, and how to work together in teams and expect the unexpected and still be able to, roll with it.
Which particular read-write-web technologies are you focusing on or are you tracking in the educational environment? Certainly blogging.
Yeah, with the Alabama project, do you mean the ones that I use personally or the ones that I'm teaching other teachers to use?
I guess both.
Well, personally, it's a gamut. If it's out there, I'm into it. I'm going to try it out. I want to, before I try to convince another teacher it's something that they can use in the classroom with their students, I'm going to make sure that I've used it and that I've mastered it, and that, because you can't give away what you don't own, and I want to make sure that I own it so that I'll be able to convince them, yeah, man, this is going to make a difference in the lives of your kids. So as far as what I'm using with the teachers, basically what I do is I start out with sort of like an introduction to 21st century concepts. I always throw in there, blogs and wikis, and let them see, get started with a blog. Blogs and wikis are usually the first two tools that I have them get started with. We create our own. We brainstorm different ways that we could utilize it. I model use by, like, for instance, we had a class wiki where the students, as they did the particular assignments for my course, this is at William & Mary, pre-service teachers had to come and they created a web quest, so they had to link it to the wiki and put a little abstract about their web quest. They did an implementation project where they integrated technology seamlessly into content area instruction, and then they had to come and put clips, photographs, student samples, things like that. So they're using the tools just naturally as we go through the different courses, as well as opening up, talking about their own blog and showing. Same with then, like in Alabama, after I do the introduction and we start utilizing some of that, we build a collaborative community. We start operating as a professional learning community, building upon the ideas of each other, sharing the kinds of things. They usually set up like NetVibes or PageFlakes as their desktop to be able to start pulling in, aggregating in everything. We do everything, anything that I feel like everybody, Flickr standard, Delicious is standard, having some type of desktop with Ajax technology like PageFlakes or NetVibes or something. It's pretty standard. Blogs, wikis, they really love working with digital video and to learn how to upload to YouTube. And so it's pretty much the gamut. And the way I look at it is, at first what I want them to do is I want them to practice using it, and we usually talk about professional learning ways that they can do that. We develop learning contracts where it's what they're interested in as teachers, because I want to model with them what it is I want them to do with their students. And then from there, they're able to take, and we can brainstorm, and they start figuring out, I could take this unit that I normally teach in a analog way, and I can tweak it just a little bit, and I could use this tool and this tool and this tool. Man, that would be a really good student-centered kind of activity that the students can do.
Are there some teachers who just find that they're not interested, that it doesn't ring their bell, and that just the way their brain works, they don't want to go down this path?
Yeah, just like there's some students that say they're not interested and it doesn't ring their bell and they don't want to go down that path. So then what you do is you have to say, okay, how am I to turn this kid on? What am I going to do? What's their X factor? Just like a salesman looks for the X factor. What's going to be relevant to this kid who's going to get them turned on to physics? Or what's going to be relevant that's going to get this kid turned on to World War II? Well, that's what you got to do with teachers. You got to figure out, okay, what's this teacher's X factor? What's really going to get them turned on where they're going to be able to see that this is going to make a difference? And every time I've had a reluctant teacher, what I've found is that if you will help them understand how it's changing and how it's impacting kids. So I use reverse mentorship. I'll take a student who is really excited about the technologies and that it's really made a difference in their lives and their academic progress, and I say, hey, Johnny needs to, I want to help build his self-esteem, and so I was wondering, can he sit down and kind of show you a little bit about how to use this particular tool, and you guys maybe work on a project together? The teacher thinks, oh, isn't this cute? Look, I'm helping Johnny, and Johnny's getting real excited, and he's going to be a better kid because I really love kids, and yeah, I'm willing to do that. And what really is happening is there's a reverse mentorship going on where the teacher is getting much more out of the relationship than Johnny is, and in the end, she sees that. She sees the kind of the change in him, the excitement. She's able to use the tools, and hands down, every time a reluctant teacher has had that reverse mentorship experience, she has become one of the biggest advocates for using these tools and for seeing strictly because for the children's sake, on the difference it makes in the children that she's been trying to reach that have been pretty much unreachable.
I guess I've never thought about this. But is it possible that if you put these technologies into an academic environment in a pervasive way, that there might actually be students for whom this was not a natural way of learning and for whom it would be stifling?
I've seen that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the kid maybe who's going to become a mechanic or a forest ranger, or for whom, writing will never be engaging and is actually just something that their brain has difficulty doing. I just have never thought of this, but could this actually put them in a situation where they felt like they were not able to accomplish anything?
You know who the kids who struggle with it the most? It isn't the one that wants to be the mechanic. It's the one who wants to be the doctor and the lawyer. What I've seen over and over again is that the most gifted students, they're good at the way school's played right now. They don't want you to change it. They're just like teachers. They have too much invested. They've been playing this game since they were 4 years old, and they've mastered it, and they're real good at it, and they don't want to do this cooperative learning stuff, and they don't want to be self-directed. Tell them what they need to learn. Tell them what percentage they have to do to get an A, and they'll do it, and they'll do it well. and they don't want the game to change midstream. So what I've found, for the most part, while they have technology at home and they don't mind, they get on in a game or they use email, it's not something they feel passionate about, and they want to see the transfer into school. It's the other kids that you were talking about, the mechanic and the forest ranger and the kids, that really benefit the most by being able to use these technologies because of the multimodality of it, that it appeals to different learning styles, that the kinesthetic kid is actually served by the web, the way that the kid who's really artsy is able to, this now is working through a medium that is going to allow them to work through their strengths rather than their weakness. And I think that what I've really seen, and it's been very interesting, is that that the child who would typically be described as more left brain, that is very analytical, very linear, that they have a tougher time acclimating to a teacher who decides they're going to shift things around a little bit in their classroom and make it a little bit more constructivist. And it's the other kids who actually now, for the first time, are allowed to accomplish the objective from their strength rather than their weakness. And it's the typical gifted kid or the successful child that is having to accomplish the task from something that's not as comfortable for them. And so that's where I get the pushback.
Very interesting. I know for me personally, I really appreciated podcasts because I've discovered that that's a really effective way for me to learn. And so I've thought, in a lot of ways, if you're going to college and you're able to go to the lectures and read the book, and the lectures are also podcasts so you can listen to them a couple of times, it would seem that would really expand the opportunities for different learning styles for people with different learning styles to fully feel engaged and participate. Are schools adopting podcasting? Is that happening at the same level that maybe blogging or wikis are being utilized?
I haven't felt so. Most of the experiences that I've had, both on the higher ed level and in the K through 12 arena, there's some teachers that are podcasting and see the benefits, but not as much as with the writing. But it's because what their world, their comfort zone, what they're used to. You and I, most of our educational experience was based around text. It was our relationship with the written word. And so blogs are cool because it's all about reading and writing. And so teachers, I think, wikis and blogs, they feel very comfortable with. But the podcasting thing, that's something that's a little bit new and out of the comfort zone. However, I will say to you that it would have made all the difference in the world for me as a learner, because I came from a highly dysfunctional background. In fact, we talked about homelessness a little bit before. I was homeless for a great deal of my childhood and much of my young adult life, and didn't read my first book cover to cover until age 26. And if there had been podcasting, I would have been, I am an auditory learner, as a lot of high poverty children are, and great storyteller and that kind of thing. And if I could have had podcast available, I would have done much better. In fact, the statistics professor, was kind enough to let me record every class that we took. And I came home and turned it into my own personal little podcast, have them all over my desktop, and that's how I studied. And I really believe that's why I was successful, because I am auditory.
Podcasting does require a little bit more technology as well, both from the standpoint of the producer and the listener. Blogging and wikis are taking place within a web browser, fairly standard equipment. Both to podcast and to listen to podcasts, there is a little bit of a higher level of technological need, and maybe that describes as well why it would lag behind. Although there's just an enormous amount of information now. How are we going to cope with the huge amounts of information that are being produced?
I heard John Seely Brown describe it best. He talked about an article I read that he wrote. He talked a little bit about how in the future we're really going to have to become our own information, our own digital librarian information specialist, and that we're going to have the real curriculum, the real skill that's going to be needed both by teachers and students is going to be able to understand how to go out there and harvest all that information and then be able to synthesize it and analyze it and then turn around and recreate it and disseminate it in a different format. And that being able to understand how to be your own digital age reference librarian is going to be a new skill that we're all going to have to be able to develop to understand how to navigate in that heavy information access that's out there.
You think about the relatively short period of time in which the transformation has been from someone like Abraham Lincoln, who was lucky to have one or two books that he could read over and over again, to now students growing up for whom they have to make choices every minute about the vast amounts of information and what they'll consume.
That's the reason why, if we could focus back on self-directed interest. Nathaniel Bowditch comes to mind, and I remember back in the early days, he was the father of modern mathematics, and I remember that some of the things that he was doing, where he was like on a ship and he was doing lots of discoveries and writing in notebooks, and he was very motivated, and all of it was self-directed, simply because it was something he was passionate about, he was interested about, and he wasn't even in school. And I think that there's going to be so much information out there that if we don't start to make principled changes in the ways that we do school, that we do learning, that we do teaching, that if we don't reinvent ourselves in a way that can really maximize on the passions and the self-interest of a student and allow them to move in that direction, that we're going to get frozen, because there's going to be so much information you won't know which way to move, and it'll be impossible to to really get anywhere, because there'll be too much to learn. Instead, I think that we need to start focusing on teaching kids how to learn, how to access, how to synthesize, and not worry so much about making sure that they know a whole set of facts and figures, because you can pull that up with a couple clicks.
I am interested in asking you a little bit about the world of the homeless and education.
Sure.
And do you see some of these tools really being significant for them? I listened to your talks about your own background and was very struck by the idea that a lot of the learning methods of homeless children, or the ways that their brains have adapted to work in that environment, really fit with these technologies.
They do. Yeah, I think that it's going to be death or life, personally, for these kids. I think that it is possible to break generational poverty. I think that I'm a living example that you can climb out of that kind of background, and you can climb out of highly dysfunctional situations and high poverty situations, and that you can move forward and do fine. But I do think that that we could literally trap a child to have to stay in that kind of circumstance and make their circumstance have to define them if we do not empower them with these technologies. And the difference being is that the affluent kid is going to get what they need within their home. Their parents are connected. They're going to make sure that they get it. And the kids that are in the kinds of situation we're talking about with extreme poverty, that they're not going to get it except within the safety net of a teacher's classroom. With a changing demographic, it's a moral responsibility of an educator to just make the determination that I need to master these skills so that I can give them away. Otherwise, the haves will continue to be the haves, and the have-nots will continue to be the have-nots. One of the things that I've found is that if you look at the kinds of things, like a lot of times what'll happen, Steve, is when you get a child, because homeless kids move a lot. Every time they get 3 or 4, they get into place, they start paying rent, they get behind, whatever set of circumstances conspire against them, and then they have to move, and they have to move. And with McKinney-Vento, they don't have to. They could stay in the same school, but a lot of times parents aren't aware of that, and schools don't go to the trouble to make sure that happens, and so you have a learner that's only with a teacher for a very little while. And out of the situation where they're kind of in a war zone, and they're always having to use their verbal skills to be able to get in a place, or use their verbal skills to get out of a situation. And because things are always changing, they're used to ambiguity, they're used to chaos. The kind of change is something that becomes very comfortable for them, that using these kinds of technologies and being able to adapt as things come up and figure things out on your own, and being able to use your verbal skills, and being very intuitive in the way that you approach problem solving, using your storytelling skills, the only thing that they're not going to have is the conceptualization skills, because it's hard to conceive what you've never seen. So if we allow them to engage via the web and to collaborate with other people, then they can help to build that schema and from which they can draw from. So what I'm excited about is that if we do give our most at-risk learners, our most impoverished students, the kinds of skills using Web 2.0 technologies and social networking tools that A, they can fill the gaps conceptually, B, they will be working from their strengths because they're used to ambiguity, they can change, they aren't scared, they're risk takers, and that they're able to verbalize. If you put them in a type of technology like we're using here peer-to-peer with Skype, they could connect with experts from around the world and be able to interview and handle themselves just fine, because that's a skill set that they have. Often teachers, when they come, they feel like they got to go back and look at what they don't know how to do, and they got to go back and try to catch them up, and the whole time they're spending catching them up, they get further behind, and they're really doing them a disservice. And what instead they need to do is figure out what they can do and what they can do well, and then celebrate that and give them experiences that are going to allow them to build upon that skill set and move forward from there, instead of putting them even further behind by trying to catch them up. I mean, they're only going to be with you a little while. There's only so much math you can teach them.
So this is something you and I have talked about before, and that interests both of us. If they're moving from school to school, then even if they do encounter a good teacher who's providing access to that kind of technology, that they may not have that for very long.
That's right.
So what can we do to I guess you and I are looking at the idea of putting computers in homeless shelters. Can you think of anything else that could be done that would actually make an impact here?
What I tell teachers to do is, when they get that baby, to concentrate on teaching that child metacognition skills. Help them understand their learning style, what it is how they learn best. Help them to think through, basically not trying to teach them, because they're never going to catch them up, but helping them learn how they learn. That way, when they go to the next teacher, they'll already, even if instead of it just being a disaster and having to start over at ground zero and build up the little bit of time they have, they can go in and be equipped to say, this is the kinds of things that I learn best. This is what I need to be able to learn. By giving them access to technology, not only in the classroom, because, teachers, you got to speak in their defense. I mean, this differentiated classroom, especially with this changing demographic, they have so many different developmental levels and some children with so many different needs. It's so hard to be able to give, just the difference in the way that children process, much less all the extra variables that are involved in the makeup of how a child learns. So I think by putting technology in homeless shelters and by trying to give these kids access where they spend their afternoons or their evenings is going to make a big difference, because then they can have access to online mentors, they can have access to other students in a disembodiment format where there isn't any evaluation or criticism or making fun. They can be on equal footing. I think that was probably the most liberating thing for me, is when I started collaborating with people online very early, back I think it was like around 1988 when the software first came out where you could connect with other people, and I was right there doing it. I remember I would keep a dictionary in my lap, and because as I was chatting back and forth, I would have to look up words and try to figure out how to spell them, because I couldn't do sentence structure and I couldn't spell. And I wasn't judged at all, because they had no idea of my socioeconomic status. They had no idea of anything except how I was being presented through these technologies. And as a result of being put on equal footing like that, I grew tremendously. You mentioned transformative. It was truly what brought me, there were three major factors, but that was truly one of them that brought me out of that poverty, where I climbed out and was able to move forward and be what I consider highly successful.
And as I recall, you also talked about the fact that the teacher may not know that the students are transient or homeless.
Exactly.
Because the families do such a good job of learning how to kind of hide that.
It would have been death by dismemberment in my family if we had told. In fact, I tease and tell when I go and share my story at different conferences for those that work with the homeless, is that the only reason I share it now is because Mother is no longer on the earth, and if she was, no way, because I'd be in big trouble even as an adult. But nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to admit that. I mean, there comes a point in time where you just have to be humble and do it because there's nowhere else to go. Your kid's starving. You got to be warm, whatever. But it's the kind of thing that when you can avoid it, you do. And one of the places you're going to do that is with the teacher. And, one of the things I was told all the time is that we'd be taken away if we told. So, yeah, teachers are working blind at that sometimes. They have no idea. I'll give you a perfect example. My son, the year he graduated from high school, we were at the beach and we were jet skiing, and he asked me, could he bring a girl? And I said, yeah. And so she shows up, and cute girl, and we start talking. Well, it turns out she was the winner of a huge scholarship in the school division, so I knew exactly who she was, and she was a homeless child, had been homeless most of her life. And so we connected. My son didn't know that, and he was just like, oh my gosh. But we connected very well, and were able to talk about lots of things. And one of the things that she said is that she wished she could have told some of her friends, but that she'd be off with her friends and they would be making fun of homeless people. And she wished she could tell her teachers. She would try to drop hints, but the teachers just didn't get it. But she didn't want to be treated differently. She didn't want to stand out. She already felt like she stood out so much that she didn't want to tell the teacher what was going on so that she could get special preferential treatment because she didn't want to be treated different by her peers. So I think technology can, for these kids especially, will make all the difference. In A, it'll give them highly marketable skills. B, it'll help them learn in ways that they truly process information best. It'll help them connect with experts and people around the world that, because they won't know either, will treat them as equals. And I just think that the only place they're going to get those skills is either going to be in a shelter that understands this and has the equipment with the kinds of things we're thinking about doing, or with a loving, caring teacher that is going to give that kind of access to all the students in her classroom.
Sheryl, we're just about out of time. Would you give people enough information about what you're doing that they could find your website or find resources from you if they were interested in learning more?
Sure. There Wikispaces, after I did the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, I set up a wiki that has several resources on it that is actually in a building state and would love for people to add to it. But it's I think it's wikispaces.com, and then the initials, let me write it here, N for National, A for Association, National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. So it's NAEHCY. Wikispaces.com. They can go there. They can also go to my blog, which is 21st Century Learning at typepad.com. And it's my blog over at 21st Century Collaborative, but it's 21st Century Learning, one word, .typepad.com. And a lot of my resources are there that they can get to. All the work from Alabama is linked from there if they want to scoot around and look at the ABPC or the Alabama Best Practice Center work. And there's lots of wikis and blogs, lots of, if there's things in Delicious they can connect to. They could just do a Google search on my name and tons of stuff will come up.
Terrific. Sheryl, we worked hard to arrange this interview. I want to thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for being so patient and so flexible. Showed me that you truly are an adaptive expert because you had to change your plans several times because of me imposing upon you, and I certainly appreciate you being so graceful and so gracious about it.
Oh, it was well worth it. Sheryl, thank you.
And thank you. I've enjoyed it.